Welcome to WikiPodcast. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into the extraordinary life of Mahatma Gandhi, a name, synonymous with peace, profound societal change, and revolutionary nonviolent resistance. Our mission today is to unpack his journey, from a shy, uncertain young man to a global icon whose principles transformed a nation and continue to inspire millions.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how one individual's unwavering commitment to truth and nonviolence could fundamentally reshape an entire colonial landscape. And in doing so, echo across continents, profoundly influencing major civil rights movements for generations to come. We'll trace the pivotal moments that didn't just forge his philosophy, but really propelled him onto the world stage.
So, to truly understand the man who would reshape a nation, we have to journey back to his humble beginnings. October 1869 in Porbandar, India. Born Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, his father Karamchand served as the Diwan, which is essentially a chief minister in various princely states. So that gave young Gandhi some early exposure to governance and public life.
Exactly. That early family environment in coastal Gujarat, especially his father's role, it sort of subtly set the stage for a young man who would later challenge some of the most powerful institutions on earth. His mother, Putlibai, from a Pranami Vaishnava family, instilled in him deep religious principles, particularly that idea of non-harm, ahimsa. This foundation, combined with his family's later move to Rajkot, where his father also served as Diwan, definitely shaped his early perspective.
Okay, so he went to London to study law at the Inner Temple, and he was called to the bar at just 22. But here's where his path takes an unexpected turn, right? After struggling for like 2 uncertain years to establish a successful law practice back in India, a pivotal opportunity arose. He was really unable to find his footing, feeling quite uncertain about his future then.
Right. It was a Muslim merchant from Kathiawar, a region of Gujarat named Dada Abdullah. He had a large shipping business in South Africa, and he needed a lawyer for his distant cousin in Johannesburg. They specifically sought someone with Kathiawar heritage, you see. So Gandhi accepted the offer. 105 plus expenses, committing to at least a year in the British colony of Natal. This decision, seemingly just a business trip for a legal case, would fundamentally alter his personal trajectory and, ultimately the course of history. It forced him to confront racial injustices directly in a way he perhaps never had before.
So April 1893, a 23-year-old Gandhi sails to South Africa. Almost immediately upon arrival, he faced this shocking, blatant discrimination purely because of his skin color and his Indian heritage. He was physically kicked into a gutter, beaten for refusing to sit on the floor of a stagecoach, and in perhaps the most famous incident, thrown off a first-class train at Pietermaritzburg for refusing to give up his seat. That's incredible. He even defied a court order to remove his turban, which was, a deeply personal and cultural affront.
This period in South Africa, spanning 21 years, truly became the crucible where Gandhi's political views and his ethical framework were forged and profoundly developed. He found these inhumane practices not just humiliating, but deeply unsettling. It led him to question the standing of Indians within the British Empire. Initially, he even thought of himself as a Briton first and an Indian second. But these experiences directly challenged that identity. This is where we see a personal experience of injustice becoming the powerful fuel for a global movement. He realized that this wasn't just his humiliation, but an injustice inflicted on an entire community, right?
Right. And instead of immediately returning to India after the Abdullah case concluded in May 1894, he chose to stay. He chose to protest. He became determined to fight these injustices from within. He helped found the Natal Indian Congress in 1894, effectively transforming the fragmented Indian community there into a unified, powerful political force. And he even famously refused to press charges after being viciously attacked by a white mob when he landed in Durban in January 1897. He chose non-retaliation instead.
Yes, that refusal to press charges is crucial. It really hints at the philosophy he was developing. Then in 1906, when the Transvaal government enacted a new, particularly egregious law compelling the registration of Indian and Chinese populations, essentially treating them like criminals, Gandhi introduced his evolving methodology, satyagraha. This term, which translates roughly to devotion to truth, or truth force, became the cornerstone of his nonviolent protest. He urged Indians to defy the law and peacefully suffer the punishments for doing so. His groundbreaking ideas on protest, persuasion, and, public relations were truly emerging here, influenced in part by ancient texts like the Turkua.
Wow. And he even established an idealistic community called Tolstoy Farm near Johannesburg in 1910, with help from his friend Herman Kallenbach. It really does seem like South Africa was his personal laboratory for nonviolent resistance. What exactly did he experiment with there?
Oh, it absolutely was. Tolstoy Farm wasn't just a place to live, it was a communal experiment. Living simply, self-sufficiency, equality. They practiced a form of nonviolent resistance in their daily lives. Cultivated crops, educated their children, trained activists, all while nurturing his policy of peaceful resistance. He was testing principles of communal living, economic independence from British goods, and the very practical application of satyagraha through collective non-cooperation. The profound impact he had there is undeniable. I mean, even after black South Africans gained the right to vote in 1994, Gandhi was proclaimed a national hero in South Africa, with numerous monuments dedicated to him.
So after 2 decades honing his philosophy in South Africa, 1915 marked Gandhi's momentous return to India. At 45, he arrived with an international reputation as a leading Indian nationalist, didn't he?
He did.
He quickly joined the Indian National Congress and by 1920 assumed its leadership.
And this return initiated a profound shift. Gandhi transformed the Congress from, well, a largely liberal elite organization, kind of rooted in British Whiggish traditions, into a mass movement. He gave it a distinct Indian character, making its message resonate deeply with the common populace. His vision went far beyond just political independence. He championed causes like easing poverty, expanding women's rights, building religious harmony, and perhaps most radically, ending untouchability. He even adopted the simple hand-spun dhoti in 1921 to personally identify with India's rural poor. That made anti-colonial nationalism accessible to everyone.
Right. And he initiated nationwide campaigns.
Yeah.
In 1919, he sought Muslim cooperation against the British by supporting the Khilafat movement, which was a significant pan-Islamic movement in India aiming to protect the Ottoman Caliphate. This showed his early efforts to bridge religious divides, right, for a common cause against colonial rule. But in response to his growing influence and his announced civil disobedience intentions, the British passed the Repressive Rolat Act, allowing for indefinite detention without trial. Then came the tragic Amritsar massacre, where British officers fired on peaceful protesters.
Yes, the massacre, where hundreds were killed, and the subsequent British response. It solidified Gandhi's belief that only Swaraj, or complete self-rule, would secure fair treatment for Indians. He fundamentally shifted his focus entirely to political independence, leading the non-cooperation movement. He'd articulated this back in his 1909 book, Hind Swaraj, that British rule survived only through Indian cooperation. When he was arrested for sedition in 1922 and served 2 years, the movement fractured. It really highlighted the immense challenge of sustaining unity without his direct leadership. And that period, unfortunately, also saw the end of cooperation between Hindus and Muslims as the Khilafat movement collapsed.
Okay, we've talked about these grand political movements, but what about something like the Salt March? What was the tangible impact of that on the daily lives of ordinary Indians? In 1930, he launched the iconic Salt Satyagraha, leading the 400-kilometer Dandi Salt March to protest the British salt tax. He famously described British rule as a curse that has impoverished the dumb millions by a system of progressive exploitation. He even sent a personal letter to Lord Irwin, the Viceroy, condemning British rule directly.
Well, this was a masterstroke of civil disobedience precisely because it turned a basic commodity, salt, into a potent weapon. Uniquely, salt was something everyone needed, right? So it hit the British economically through the tax and united Indians across all classes. It made the abstract idea of colonial oppression palpable, relatable. It showed how nonviolent action could expose the absurdity of the system. This act, along with his clever use of terms like Ramaraja, invoking an ideal just rule and other cultural symbols in his campaigns, it deeply appealed to the cultural and historical values of Indian villages. It really transformed him into a kind of sacred, messiah-like folk hero in many communities.
Right. Even as the world was consumed by World War II, a different, equally monumental struggle was unfolding in India. Gandhi intensified his demands, believing India couldn't fight for democratic freedom abroad while denied it at home. That makes sense. So in 1942, he launched the Quit India movement, leading to his arrest and the imprisonment of tens of thousands of Congress leaders. His wife, Kasturba, tragically died during his 2-year imprisonment in the Aga Khan Palace.
Yes. His arrest and that of other Congress leaders were met with strong retaliation by countrymen. People damaged railway stations, police stations. It showcased the deep unrest. Interestingly, while in prison, there was a summary of an interview released by a British journalist, Stuart Gelder, claiming Gandhi was willing to make concessions, even repudiate the Quit India movement. Gandhi and Congress leaders later vehemently stated that these words were distorted. It just illustrates the political complexities and the pressures he faced, even in confinement.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, heartbreaking. Partition. Gandhi vehemently opposed the partition of India into separate Hindu-majority and Muslim-majority states. He called for a unified India. He even suggested an agreement for Congress and the Muslim League to cooperate under a provisional government, resolving partition by plebiscite later.
But Muslim nationalism, strongly led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, vehemently demanded a separate homeland. The All India Muslim League demanded divide and quit India. So, despite Gandhi's tireless efforts for unity, Britain granted independence in August 1947, simultaneously partitioning the British Indian Empire. As millions were displaced in one of the largest migrations in human history, horrific religious violence erupted, especially in Punjab and Bengal. It was chaos. Gandhi actually abstained from the independence celebrations. He dedicated himself instead to walking through affected villages, trying to alleviate suffering, and bravely undertaking multiple hunger strikes to stop the communal violence. One notable fast was specifically to stop violence and influence Home Minister Sardar Patel to release Pakistan's rightful share of sterling balances, which had been withheld.
Which brings us to his tragic end. His last fast, begun on January 12, 1948, was intended to stop this religious violence, particularly in Delhi. But his unwavering defense of both Pakistan and Indian Muslims and his insistence on justice for Pakistan, well, it led to a dangerous belief among some extreme Hindu nationalists that he was too lenient, maybe even betraying his own people.
It really raises an important question, doesn't it, about the profound personal cost of standing for peace and unity in a time of intense violent division. On January 30th, 1948, at an interfaith prayer meeting in Delhi, Nathuram Godse, a militant Hindu nationalist from Pune, assassinated Gandhi, fired 3 bullets into his chest. His reported last words were, "Harama," meaning, "Oh God." His funeral was a monumental event, over 1 million people present. He was cremated at the Rajghat Memorial in New Delhi. That solemn black marble platform marks his cremation site now.
Looking back then, what are the core lessons, the lasting impacts of Gandhi's philosophy? His life was guided by profound principles. He embraced 5 vows rooted deeply in Jainism and Hindu yoga: truth, satya, nonviolence, ahimsa, celibacy or self-restraint, brahmacharya, non-stealing, asteya, and non-possession or non-attachment, aparigraha. He emphasized that without imposing these vows on oneself, one couldn't truly embark on this experiment of nonviolent change.
Right. And his concept of satyagraha, rooted in Hindu philosophical traditions like Advaita Vedanta and Upanishadic texts, fundamentally extended the idea of nonviolence from just a personal virtue to a large-scale political instrument. He believed nonviolence was infinitely superior to violence. But interestingly, he also held a nuanced view. He stated he'd prefer violence to cowardice. He once said he'd rather India resort to arms in defense of its honor than cowardly witness its own dishonor, showing that true nonviolence for him demanded immense courage, not passivity. It wasn't easy.
And he was also an incredibly prolific writer, wasn't he?
Oh, yes.
His 1909 book, Hind Swaraj, became the intellectual blueprint for India's independence, famously published with no rights reserved, added in several influential newspapers: Young India, Nava Yuvan, Harijan. And his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, is really a must-read. It offers such a detailed personal account of his philosophy and his ideas on ahimsa.
Absolutely. And his influence transcended India's borders entirely. He's widely considered the greatest figure of the Indian independence movement. He was named Asian of the Century by Asia Week in 1999 and the greatest man of the millennium in a 2000 BBC poll. Albert Einstein, who actually corresponded with Gandhi, called him the greatest man of our age. High praise indeed. His writings and unique approach to social and political change continue to be rigorously studied by philosophers, political scientists, even environmental thinkers across the globe today.
And perhaps his greatest legacy is the powerful inspiration he provided for civil rights and freedom movements worldwide. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, the 14th Dalai Lama, they're often referred to as children of Gandhi, his spiritual heirs to nonviolence by Time magazine. That shows how his methodology was adopted and adapted across so many diverse struggles.
It really demonstrates how universally and deeply his philosophy resonated. It wasn't just for India. His birthday, October 2nd, is now fittingly recognized by the United Nations as the International Day of Nonviolence. His life and ideas continue to prompt critical thinking about morality and politics, the true nature of power, and even technology's role in society. His enduring relevance asks us, to consistently reevaluate what it means to create lasting change.
Gandhi's journey really reminds us that true power can lie not in brute force, but in unwavering moral conviction and the quiet, unyielding courage to stand for truth. It challenges us to consider, in an increasingly interconnected and often volatile world, is true power found in the might of arms, or perhaps in the profound transformative force of nonviolent resistance. Thanks for listening. Write us your opinion in the comments on how you think Gandhi's principles of nonviolence can be applied to conflicts in today's world. Subscribe to the channel to help more listeners reach our episodes. Thank you and have an amazing day.